Hello and welcome to the Dyno Six Pack Dynasty Football Podcast. We are switching it up a little bit today and kind of changing gears. We're getting to the point in the season where your teams are kind of starting to take shape, and you can kind of get an idea if your team's more of a rebuilder than a contender. At that point, you're kind of looking to start get some draft picks and start looking at the future. And that can be a little bit of a scary proposition, even just me up until last year, as far as like the college scouting goes, like I really didn't start till after the Super Bowl, like once the NFL stuff was over. So this year, I wanted to get ahead of that and kind of start getting this class in my head ahead of time. And I figured this will help some of those rebuilding teams kind of feel a little bit better about moving off some of those established stars for picks when they kind of know what the future of the positions look like. I got my guest here, Corey Pieper, today. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. I always like talking college football players.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited to do this. This will be my first Dynasty or my first Devy show, so I'm going to do just a little bit of the lifting. I'm going to let Corey do most of the heavy lifting on these guys, since this is kind of like his area of expertise. He does a lot of college work over at the site, Fantasy Six Pack, of course. What other kind of stuff you got going on?
So you can also catch me in the off seasons. You can catch me on the In This League War Room podcast, where I actually do NFL draft coverage with them, with Scott Bogman over there.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a good one. You definitely need to check that out if you haven't already. And then one last note before we get going here, you can kind of see scrolling across the bottom, head on over to fantasy6pack.net/plans, become an all access member. You really get so much for your money. You get betting, DFS projections, of course, all the dynasty redraft rankings. We have Fantasy Pros rankings contest winners for pretty much every fantasy sport. And best of all, you get access to our private Discord, where you can reach out to me or Corey or any of our other writers and get like specific advice that's detailed for your fantasy league. So it's really a pretty sweet deal. We're pretty much constantly in there, and there's always questions that are popping off. But we got a lot of guys we want to get to today, so we'll get this going now. We are going to start off with just the 2024 class, and we are going to start off with the quarterbacks here. At number one, I think most people pretty much have this name in their head already, and that's going to be Caleb Williams, quarterback from USC. You look at what he's done on the year so far. He's 75 for 101, which is about a 74% completion percentage, 1,200 yards, 15 touchdowns, and most impressive, 0 interceptions so far. Pretty much the locked and loaded 101 for next year in Superflex leagues, would you say?
Oh, yeah, I think so. But you have to expect he'll go 1 overall in the NFL draft class at this point. He probably would have went 1 overall last year if he was eligible to come out. The only real knock you can make against Caleb Williams at this point is that we've seen quarterbacks in the Lincoln Riley offense. Lincoln Riley is the coach that he followed from Oklahoma to USC. Some of them have succeeded in the NFL, like Kyler Murray. Baker Mayfield is a little bit on the other end. Now, I think Caleb Williams' arm talent, he can rip the ball into pretty much any window, and he's so creative. All the comparisons are made to Patrick Mahomes, which is a huge
lofty.
Yeah, that's a huge lofty goal to reach. I'm not sure he'll get there, but he's a very, very high-end quarterback talent that we've seen, and he will be the 101 in a Superflex draft.
I've caught in parts of pretty much every game so far, and it's hard to find a lot of negatives with what he's done so far. I guess if there's anything, maybe he holds onto the ball a little bit long. Sometimes, he kind of dances around in the pocket, but is there anything that you've seen that kind of gives you any pause from him translating to the next level?
Yeah, I would say that you kind of mentioned it. He holds the ball a little long, and the way that he holds the ball is he holds it kind of away from his body a little bit. So you see him get stripped of the ball a lot. So I don't know the fumbles. You mentioned he hasn't turned the ball over with any interceptions this year, but
true.
At least in the past, I know he's struggled with fumbles, but he's so creative that you can live with some of the holding the ball too long, because he'll break contain and then he can get out on the move. And just very much like Patrick Mahomes, he can reset his footwork and deliver strikes from a variety of arm angles.
Yeah, he really is incredible. If you haven't had a chance to go watch him, it's definitely worth setting a USC game on DVR and just kind of go check it out. I was watching with one of my uncles who had never really heard of him, and it was a game where he had 300 yards and 3 touchdowns at halftime. And I'm like, man, I told you this guy is legit.
Yes.
Number 2 on the list for most people, I would say so far, still Drake Maye. And as a North Carolina Tar Heel fan, I've been a little bit it's been up and down. It hasn't been as hot of a start as we wanted it to be on the year, completing about 72% of his passes, only a 5-4 touchdown interception ratio. One thing that does help Drake Maye is he kicks in a little bit extra on the ground there. Is he still kind of the solid number 2, or have the guys that are 3, 4, 5 kind of close that gap a little bit for you?
No, he's still solid 2 to me. I think it's Caleb Williams in his own tier. Then it's Drake Maye in a tier. Drake Maye is going to get all the comparisons to Justin Herbert. He is big. He can move. He is not someone who is not going to just sit in the pocket. He can move, and he has an NFL talent arm. Now, the questions are, this season, you mentioned North Carolina, they switched offensive coordinators. Phil Longo was there the year before, and he, as a master of generating offense, he's done it for years at different places. He's moved on to Wisconsin. Drake Maye has had to adjust to the new system, and I think sometimes with Drake Maye is that he struggles to get through all of his progressions. He had Josh Downs last year, who was so good at getting open so quick, and that was typically the first look, and then he would just rip it to him. Now that they've struggled finding a replacement, whether it's Devontae Walker with his NCAA eligibility issues has been the big part of that. And it seems like he just kind of struggles to get through some of the progressions, but still, this is an NFL caliber arm. We've seen him make NFL throws, and I think Caleb Williams has solidified himself as number one, but I still expect Drake Maye likely goes in the top 5 picks.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, he's done enough, and like the tools are still flashing there, that even though there's been a little bit of kind of mental lapses here and there, like the tools are still very much apparent there. Number 3 here. So I know I mentioned North Carolina is kind of one of my favorite teams. The other team I cheer for, growing up in Idaho, is Boise State. And so my first real experience to the number 3 here, Michael Penix Jr., was this year against Boise State, where he put on a freaking show, man. Really, I'd say he's one of the biggest risers for a lot of people. A lot of ranks I saw him outside of the top 5 quarterbacks, even just 6 months ago. And I think the start has really jumped him up a lot. What have you seen from Penix this year that you like, or what has made him jump up, or have you always kind of had him at number 3 here?
I've always been high on him, but the knocks are evident. The knocks are he's had so many injuries. So he's been in college since 2018, and he has torn, I believe it's his left ACL. At the time he was with Indiana, he tore his ACL in 2018, and then 2019 it was a shoulder, I believe. In 2020 it was the ACL again, and then he hurt his shoulder again. So before this season, I kind of knocked Hendon Hooker, because I thought he's old and he has an injury history. Well, Michael Penix is a better quarterback. I think he has more talent than Hendon Hooker did. And even coming with a torn ACL as an older prospect, he got drafted in the 2nd round by the Lions. Penix, like you said, if you haven't seen him play too, another one, you have to stay up late because he's playing at Washington, but he has an incredible arm who can throw these deep hash. You'll see him throw 45 yards down the sideline just on the numbers if he can stay healthy. And that's the only real question with him, because I do not doubt at all that he is a traditional drop back passer who can also move in the pocket when he needs to.
Yeah, he really is nice. And I mean, yeah, I feel so bad for all of you guys on like the central and east time zone over here. I'm out here on the West Coast, and this is a great year to be a West Coast college football fan. I mean, there's a lot of good teams in this final year of the Pac-12. It's a bummer that it's splitting up, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot of talent this year. Another guy here, sticking in the conference here, we got Shedeur Sanders at number 4. I mean, he's came out and really kind of taken everything by storm in terms of the college football world right now. We saw him have a little bit of a rough game yesterday, which I think was a bit expected with Travis Hunter sitting out there. But obviously he's still number 4, so you still like what you've seen here. But were you kind of expecting a step back against that Oregon defense yesterday, or was that like a little bit of, did he kind of expose some things that maybe like, okay, maybe there are some things he still needs to kind of shore up here?
Yeah, Shedeur Sanders has always been, people say he came out of nowhere. Shedeur Sanders was a 4-star recruit who had offers from places like Alabama. He just chose to go to Jackson State, which is a historically black college, because his dad was the coach. It wasn't like we didn't know Shedeur Sanders was talented. Right. The question was, would it translate to Colorado? And he came out that first week against TCU and put on a show, and everybody suddenly was all on Shedeur Sanders. But there's flaws in Shedeur Sanders' game. Now, because his dad is a coach and he's grown up around the sport, like his thing is he processes the game so well. You see him and he just knows how to get, I talked about how Drake Maye struggles to get through progressions. Shedeur Sanders understands every bit of that. Now, his arm isn't quite at the level, I would say, of any of the players we've talked about so far. He doesn't have the big ability to sit back and rip it like Caleb Williams or Drake Maye or Michael Penix, but he knows what he's doing and he's still learning. So I do not think it's a guarantee that Shedeur Sanders goes out this year. It very well could be, but I could just as easily see him returning next year. I know there's been some reports that he's like the odds-on favorite if he goes back to be the number 1 pick the following year. I don't know. That's so too far away from me, but I think if he goes out this year, he's probably day 2 pick. But if he comes back to college to take another year, especially because Colorado's just printing NIL money right now, and Shedeur Sanders is a big part of that. So we'll have to watch that one.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I think you'll kind of see that more and more where there's those guys that are like not top 10 guaranteed picks, they're kind of the fringe first rounders where they're like, making this money here. Like, why wouldn't I just come back, be the big man on campus and make a little bit of money and then hopefully land in a better spot next year? It's
we've even seen
changed the world.
There was a report of Caleb Williams' dad actually said that Caleb Williams was thinking about it. Now, it wasn't from Caleb Williams' mouth, but that I think it was GQ magazine where Caleb Williams' dad said he's thinking about skipping the NFL draft this year. And that one I don't see happening because that first pick overall, they get paid.
Yeah, exactly, for sure. Rounding out our quarterbacks here for the 2024 class, we got J.J. McCarthy coming in number 5 here. Another guy off to a pretty good start, completing almost 80% of his passes, 915 yards, got 8 touchdowns with 3 interceptions. What have you seen from him so far? And was he a guy that you kind of had in that top 5 to start the year, or is he one that's kind of exceeded expectations in the early going?
Yeah, I'm probably a little higher than most on J.J. McCarthy. He gets knocked because statistically it's just not as impressive as some of the other ones, but that's because Michigan leans into the run so much. Now, physical talent and ability, JJ McCarthy has it all too. JJ McCarthy has a big arm and he can really layer his throws, meaning get it over the linebacker in front of the safety. You see him hit a lot of Michigan runs a lot of like in breaking routes, and he's very good at the touch throws, even though he does have a big arm. And he can run too. He can pick up a lot of yards with his legs. They just don't really ask him to do that at Michigan because they have 2 NFL caliber running backs and a lot of NFL caliber talent elsewhere. When I think of JJ McCarthy, I think of this past draft where Will Levis just kept getting pushed up for all of the tools he offered, and eventually he got drafted in the second round. If Will Levis is a second round pick on his tools, like JJ McCarthy is easily a day 2 pick on those tools who could keep rising into the first round because everything Will Levis did well, JJ McCarthy does better.
I like it. Yeah, he's a guy that I haven't really got a chance to watch this year. Shout out YouTube TV. I love the fact that I can just DVR every single college game, and I've just kind of been going back and working through. But he's one I haven't really got a chance to sit down and watch yet, so I won't say I have a ton on him one way or the other. But he is a guy that I kind of have on my list of guys to kind of go back and watch at some point. But let's kick it over to the running back position. This is kind of like between running back and receiver, those are kind of the meat and potatoes of most fantasy teams outside of your super flex leagues. So I think this is where, a lot of people are kind of tuning in for. So number 1 here, we got Raheem Sanders. A little bit of a slow start this year, but I mean, the talent's evident whenever you watch him play. How far is the gap for Raheem Sanders from number 1 down to number 2 for you? Is it pretty close, or is it like a pretty clear number 1 here in this 2024 class?
No, it's close. It's closer for the top 3, I would say, for me. But Raheem Sanders, you mentioned the slow start. He's been missing time with a knee injury. He's dealing with a knee injury right now. But it's the size of Raheem Sanders. Raheem Sanders offers, I believe he's listed at 228 by Arkansas's depth chart, and he moves. He's not a 228 pound plotter. Like, I'm a Packers fan. I've been watching AJ Dillon the last few days here, and it looks like he's running a concrete. That is not what we're seeing in Raheem Sanders. Raheem Sanders can pick up big chunks of yards. He can catch the ball. He's going to break a lot of tackles in an NFL system. Raheem Sanders, to me, is running back 1 right now. I would like to see him get back on the field, and it sounds like I think that's going to happen. If not this week, in the next couple weeks here, we will see him back at Arkansas and hopefully back in picking up big chunks of yards for them.
Yeah, I mean, he's really exciting when he's fully healthy. So just for, football fans everywhere, I hope he's able to kind of come back and look like that same guy he was before. Number 2 here, we got Trey Benson. He is one that's, done a little bit, 189 yards so far, averaging a little bit under 5 yards per carry. But, kicks in a little bit as a receiver. I believe he has like 6 or 7 catches so far through a couple of games. So not a huge producer there, but has some flashes here. Tell us about Trey Benson here. Why you got him all the way up at number 2?
I love the tackle breaking. I just love a guy who can pick up yards when they're not necessarily blocked for him. And Florida State is playing better this year. It's been a down last few years for Florida State, but they're undefeated at this point. But if you just watch Trey Benson more like last year's tape, if you watch Trey Benson, I believe he led or behind Bijan Robinson. He was second in college football in broken tackles. And you can see it. He when I watch him, you think Javonte Williams at North Carolina. You mentioned you're a North Carolina guy. So where he just picked up big chunks of yards and then he would break tackles doing it. And that's what I see with Trey Benson, where it's not always blocked for him, but when it's not blocked, he finds 4 or 5 yards. And when it is blocked, he can turn 4 or 5 yards into 12, 15 yards. He's not going to be a big breakaway speed, like Olympic speed type of player, but like we saw with Devin A-Chain, but he's going to be a guy who consistently picks up big chunks of yards, maybe not massive explosion plays.
I like it. Moving on to number 3 here, Donovan Edwards. And this is kind of a fun one that I was glad that you had on here because I kind of wanted to talk about him and then the guy you have at number 5, Blake Corum. Because when you kind of look at the stat sheets here, at least in the early going, I mean, Corum's definitely been the one that's dominated the touches and at least on the ground, Edwards has done a little bit more as a pass catcher, which I think that's kind of why you probably have him up a little bit higher just in terms for fantasy is that side here. But let's kind of group these guys together here. What do you kind of like about both guys? What are some of the cons you like or what are some of the cons you do not like? And just kind of what are your overall thoughts on this Michigan backfield?
Yeah, you nailed it. For Michigan, they tend to lean on Blake Corum because he's 5'8", he's built low to the ground, and he picks up yards for him. He's very, when you think 5'8", you usually think, kind of shifty guy, and he is, but it's the low center of gravity. He just breaks a ton of tackles for them. Mm-hmm. But it's not a breakaway speed athlete, and he's had injuries too. At the very end, he likely would have went into last year's draft, but I believe it was the bowl game or one of the very last games of the year, he tore his MCL, so he came back for the extra year. And for fantasy, that affects you, right? You're a little worried about the injuries, and then you mentioned it. It's the receiving. I think he could be a receiver. They just don't ask him to do it, and the reason they don't ask him to do it is Donovan Edwards is really explosive. Donovan Edwards is the bigger home run threat type of back. Yes, the stats don't always back it up because Blake Corum gets more carries and more touches, but like once Blake Corum got injured last year, they leaned into Donovan Edwards and he put on a show, and you can see big chunks of yards. He catches the ball like a receiver. The comparisons will be there. I think you'll hear people say the name Jahmyr Gibbs. Now, Jahmyr Gibbs went higher than most people thought, but just that natural hands catcher who Jahmyr Gibbs could split out wide for Alabama and did often to play wide receiver when they needed
the
him
team
to.
in catches.
Yeah. And Donovan Edwards, while he won't lead this team in catches because it's a very good team, he can be that type of pass catching threat at the NFL.
Do you see Blake Corum going day 2 in the NFL draft? Do you think he's more like a round 4, round 5 guy?
I think Blake Corum will probably be a late day 2, probably between 75 and 100 type of pick.
Okay. And then Edwards a little bit higher, same kind of range.
Yeah, I think Donovan Edwards, I think a team will probably take Donovan Edwards in the second round. I think a team that runs an outside zone type of a system or a spread type of a system would really love to plug Donovan Edwards in there and try to get him off the edge and just see what he can do in space.
Nice. Last guy here, running back that I want to talk about, and this is a guy that I'm really interested in your thoughts here because he's a guy that I have in both of my Devy leagues. That's Ohio State's Trevion Henderson. Kind of coming back from a knee injury as well. Started to look a little bit better last week finally. So you have him down at number 4. I've seen him, as high as number 1 in some ranks. But low, I don't think I've seen him much lower than 4 or 5. I think that's kind of about the floor that I've seen him at. A year ago, I think he was pretty much like the consensus number 1. What have you seen so far from Henderson, and what does he need to do to get back up to that number 1 conversation?
Yeah, you nailed it. So Trevion Henderson, 2 years ago, you watch Trevion Henderson's freshman tape and you think this guy is a star and he's going to be incredible. And then I think it was probably the injuries last year because you watch him last year and he didn't look like the same back. In Ohio State, even when he was healthy, I think he played 8 games. Even when he was healthy, they rotated in. Maye and Williams got, I think, more carries than him last year. And you're like, what's wrong here? And this year he started slow, but last week against Notre Dame, big game, he did. He looked faster. He broke a long touchdown run down the left sideline. And the talent is there. Trevion Henderson, former 5-star prospect, extremely great straight line speed, can catch the ball. It's just a matter of now, can he show me the rest of the year that he's staying healthy? Because seeing him at 1 is not a surprise. And if he goes the rest of the year and shows like he was a freshman season, then yes, I think Trevion Henderson could very well be the number 1 back in Devy. But it's just a matter of, I want to see it again because it's been a while since I've seen that talent. And this past week was a good start towards it. If you told me that Trevion Henderson ends up being the top running back selected in this upcoming draft by an NFL team, I wouldn't say that's not surprising at all. It just means that he's going to have to show the rest of the year that he's healthy and that he's willing to handle that big workload.
Yeah, I was wondering, do you think that the fact that they have such a star-studded group of wide receivers, is that going to kind of prevent him from getting that workload that he needs to kind of get back up into that round 1 area? Or do you think it's one of those where he should be able to produce with how much space that's opening up for him?
That is always the question with Ohio State players, those really high-end teams. So we're going to talk about a couple Ohio State receivers here, and the NFL has how many Ohio State receivers taken in the last few years in the first couple rounds? A ton of them.
So 3, yeah.
Yeah. So you see these And then that you think, okay, so it forces the safeties to play back and the linebackers to play back because you don't want to get beat deep. And that's why you expect Travion Henderson probably you have high, because even last year when I say he struggled, he averaged over 5 yards a carry, which isn't struggling. Right. It's just you have such high expectations for a player like that who as a freshman averaged almost 7 yards a carry. It probably ends up somewhere in the middle, and it'll be fun to watch them the rest of this year because Kyle McCord is their new quarterback, and it hasn't been as seamless as a transition as we've seen in the past from them. So a team to watch going forward.
Yeah, it is kind of interesting. I think the one thing that I really was looking forward to coming in this year is watching Ohio State just come in and throw it all over the yard on everybody. And it has those first few games. It seemed like it took him a little bit to kind of get comfortable and feeling like he was in control of the offense there. But let's keep it in Ohio. Let's go over to his teammate at number 1 for the wide receivers. And again, this is no surprise. If you're not playing in Superflex League, this will be your number 1 pick most likely. That's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, pretty much everyone I've talked to says he's a generational. Do you kind of echo those same thoughts? Like, what does he do that makes him so special compared to like, some of your average, first round running receivers? Like even from last year, we saw 4 wide receivers go in the first round, but like he's a clear step ahead of these guys. Like what is it that makes him so special?
Yep. So I've graded receivers at least 20 since 2018, and he scores a little above Jamar Chase to me. So with the highest one I've ever had graded.
Wow.
And
okay.
It's obviously Marvin Harrison. His father is a Hall of Fame level talent with his route running ability. Well, Marvin Harrison Jr. can separate as a route runner, but unlike his dad, he's also 6'4". He is the total package in that, yes, he can beat you by separating. He can beat you. He has incredible hands. The only knock you're going to find on a player like Marvin Harrison is that he's not great after the catch, but that's a very, very small knock because he's a fantastic at the catch point and he gets open. You mentioned it. Everybody knows how good he is, and you can't really roll coverage towards him because we're going to talk about another one of the receivers in a second here. But knowing that he's the best player on the field, it doesn't stop him from consistently getting open. We've seen him play outside. They've actually moved him more into the slot a little bit more this year too, showing that he can play big slot. I love to see that because that's where you really want to see the route running. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, he's a fantastic player. Fully expect him to be selected in the top 5 picks. And probably in the top 2 or 3 picks, actually, in the 2024 NFL draft.
Yeah, he's like definitely one of those guys that can single-handedly like change the direction of your dynasty team. Like he's a stud. Coming in at number 2 here, we got Malik Neighbors, who is off to a great start. 32 catches for over 500 yards, averaging 16 yards a catch here. I believe he already has 5 or 6 touchdowns he's hauled in here. He's really been a focal point. Tell us about Neighbors here. What can we expect when he gets to the next level next year?
So if Ohio State is wide receiver U, LSU isn't far behind that. Mm-hmm. He is the next one in that mold too. 6 foot tall, and he's explosive. He's an explosive route runner. And so I just mentioned that if there's a knock against Marvin Harrison, it's when he gets the ball in his hands. Maybe he isn't super explosive. Well, Malik Neighbors is. You get the ball in Malik Neighbors' hands, and you just let him do a lot after the catch. His thing is, I would say he's a little inconsistent. The start of the year a little slow. He had some games last year where he kind of disappears, but over a full 16 games, you just want to see a little more consistency. And the ball skills are evident. That's the thing with him. You watch him, the ball is in his area. He's going to bring it down and make a catch. It's just a little bit more of just consistency from week to week and consistently turning 50-50 balls into receptions, I'd say, with Malik Neighbors. But another one I fully expect to go in the top half of the first round and would not be surprised if he doesn't go in the top 10 either.
Yeah, it really is crazy how many like top end receivers we've had come in the draft just in like this last 5 years. It's wild. You look at number 3 here, we got Keon Coleman, and he's the guy I think that so far early in the process, I think I give him the slight lean to number 2. He looks different out there. The few games I've got to watch him. 256 yards, already hauled in 6 touchdowns. How close is the gap between Neighbors and Coleman for you? And then where do you kind of project him going into that next level?
Yeah, you nailed it. So I I would consider it a tier of 4, and we're talking about the 4th guy here in a minute, that's behind Marvin Harrison. And I think they all are their first round talents. I don't really know. You'd just kind of pick your poison because Malik Neighbors is a little bit more explosive, a little smaller receiver, but Keon Coleman, he's the big receiver again, like Marvin Harrison. And he's also, I don't want to make a knock on him not being explosive. If you saw that first week when actually LSU, where Malik Neighbors goes and Florida State played each other, You saw play. I think he had 3 touchdowns in that game, and including taking a slant and just ripping it and going for 60 yards. Because once he catches the ball, he looks like a running back with the ball. He's ready to pick up big chunks of yards. And I think the question with Keon Coleman is, so he was at Michigan State until this year where he transferred to Florida State, and it just seems like he needs some technique refinement. Can he consistently snap off a route? Right now he's winning on the fact that he's extremely physical and he's typically one of the best athletes on the field, and that doesn't always work at the NFL level. Whereas I just said Marvin Harrison has this refined route running from his dad being a technician. Keon Coleman's going to need a little bit of practice with that, but people that are 6'4", 215 and move like that don't grow on trees. So a team is going to select Keon Coleman very early and try to develop that route running and say that they get another star.
Yeah, I mean, that first game of the year that you're talking about, I can remember kicking it over there, and I'm drawing a blank on the name right now, but there was another receiver on Florida State that I was kind of tuning in to really watch, and then it was pretty quick. I was like, holy cow, this Coleman guy is like, he's the one.
Yeah, so you're talking about Johnny Wilson, who is, so they have these like twin tower receivers. Keon Coleman, is 6'4", and Johnny Wilson is 6'7", and it's a very fun team to watch.
Yeah, they are a lot of fun. It was a nice surprise turning it on and having another receiver that was just as fun to watch as he was. Holy cow. But so heading back over to wide receiver U 1.0, Ohio State, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s teammate, we got Emeka Egbuka Jr. He's another one I've seen as high as 2, about low as 5 as 6. I mean, like you said, he's kind of in that tier right behind Marvin Harrison Jr. Looking at what he's done so far this year, he's got a little over 260 yards. He's hauled in 3 touchdowns. Where do you predict Egbuka going in the draft next year, and how do you see his role kind of developing in next year? Do you see him like kind of stepping into a bigger role when he's out of Marvin Harrison Jr.'s shadow, or do you think he's more of like that complementary piece even next level?
I think that he's a first-round pick at the next level, very much like Jackson Smith-Njigba this past year. He's more of you see him operate from the slot mostly at Ohio State, but that doesn't mean that he can operate outside. He can do that. He's just not quite we just talked about, 6'4". He's a little tinier. I think he's listed at 6'1". I don't think he's probably 6'1". He's probably more like 5'11", 6 foot tall, but excellent speed, very fast. Teams will find a way to get him the ball in space, like jet sweeps. They'll put him in motion a lot. And once he gets the ball in his hands, another one, violent runner after the catch. He can work in tight areas. It's just not the typical height speed combo that we talk about with first round players, but we see lots of these 6 foot receivers now in the NFL operate. They don't necessarily beat players downfield, but Justin Jefferson is like 6 foot tall and is obviously very successful in the NFL. So Egbuka has a few concentration chops. You want to see him catch that. You want to see him clean that up a little bit, but I expect Emeka Egbuka to be a first round pick come this spring as well.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, he's really good. Last receiver here we're going to talk about, and here's another one that I kind of got my first taste of when that Boise State-Washington game earlier in the year, and that's Rome Odunze, that Washington Huskies wide receiver. And they also have McMillian there, who's just as good as he is there. But tell us a little bit about Rome Odunze. He's obviously Penix's number 1 target out there. What do you like about him that kind of separates him from his own teammate McMillan, and then what can he do at the next level to kind of help? Do you think he's a first-round pick? Do you think he's more kind of that on the fringe of the second round?
I think he could be a first round pick. He beats people vertically. That's what Washington does. I said they trust Michael Penix to get the ball down the field, and he beats people vertically. And he can run underneath. His route running is strong, but his ability to get up the field and then one-on-one situations, he's going to get the ball. He wants to get up and get the ball. It's a matter of sometimes he struggles, it looks like, to get off the line to me, where if teams come up and they like press cover him, where he struggles a little bit to get off the line. I think he just needs to bulk up, get him in an NFL strength room, get him a little stronger. And once he gets off the line, like the straight line speed is fantastic. I know it's been said, I think it was Bruce Feldman, who has the freaks list, said that they clocked him at, I think, 4.34. That's really fast.
Holy cow.
That is, for a man his size to go that fast is impressive. So this is the type of player that teams are going to take a shot on, get him in NFL weight room, and he's dynamic. I think he's probably a back end of the first round pick, but if he showed up and did something truly incredible at the combine where he did really run like low 4.3s at his size, which is probably going to be 6'2", 6'3", a team will draft him early just on those traits.
Dang. Yeah, it's crazy how many good receivers are coming into the league just these last few years. You got this year, there's a few of them coming out next year too, and we'll touch on a few of them before we head out. But the next position we're going to cover, of course, tight end. With the rise of tight end premium leagues, I think that's kind of been a nice change. It's kind of made it to where there's more than like 3 tight ends that actually matter. And you want to talk about like a talented tight end class. This year we had Sam Laporta, who's already looking good, Dalton Kincaid. We haven't even seen Michael Maye, who was the number 1 tight end for a lot of people, flash. So we could even have him come on later on the year. But I mean, next year we have a guy that I think is better than all of them coming out of Georgia. And that's number 1 here. That's Brock Bowers. I mean, he is what you dream up if you're going to drop a tight end in the lab. Look at what he's done so far. He's got 22 catches for 256 yards, 2 touchdowns, already added an extra touchdown on the ground as well. Have we seen a prospect at tight end like Brock Bowers in the last 5 or 6 years, or where does he kind of rank among some of the other top guys we've seen come out?
Well, the one that he's going to get compared to is Kyle Pitts, who I'd say what you want about the NFL production. When Kyle Pitts came out of Florida,
great prospect.
He was a once in a lifetime prospect because Kyle Pitts, Brock Bowers is fantastic. I don't want to get that mixed up here, but Kyle Pitts is, I think, probably a good 2-3 inches taller than Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers is built more like he's like a Chris Cooley. He's a little more stout. Kyle Pitts is a unicorn, right? Kyle Pitts is so big and so fast. I don't know if Brock Bowers will hit those measurements that Kyle Pitts hit. I don't think he will, but you said it. Like, this is a player who's been on a multi-time national championship team, and he's the best player on the field when he's there. Every time they find a way to get him involved in the offense. You mentioned that they consistently give him handoffs, and he separates. His route running is fantastic. He can catch the ball. There is very few athletes that we've seen at the tight end position that will match up to what Brock Bowers can do. Now, he's a little smaller. I think they have him listed at 230. That's a little small for tight end, but he's not going to play traditional inline tight end very often. I wouldn't think at the NFL level. Their teams will find a way to get this man the ball because that's what George has done, and I can't imagine, and it's worked for them, so I think it'll work in the NFL. Kyle Pitts, I think, went 4 in his draft. I think Brock Bowers is probably a top 10 pick, which is saying something. We don't see a lot of tight ends. I think the only ones I can think of in the last few years are Kyle Pitts and TJ Hawkinson, and they're both pretty good. I expect
Ebron, I think, like 8 years ago, maybe something like that.
So, and Brock Bowers is every bit the prospect that Hawkinson, Pitts, and Ebron were. I expect him to go in the top 10 picks, and I would expect him to be successful early on.
Yeah, I think so too. He's going to be one that kind of steps in like Laporta and is productive from day one, kind of breaks that tight ends aren't productive model. Kicking it over to number 2 though, and I feel like out of all the positions, like the gap between 1 and 2, it's probably tight end probably has the biggest gap. But we got Jatavion Sanders, who's also very, very explosive. Like on the early season, he's averaging over 20 yards a catch. Only found the end zone once so far, but that's probably going to change. Jatavion Sanders, Texas. Tell us about Sanders here.
Yeah, so I would agree with your statement that the gap is the largest at tight end of the positions we talked about, but Jatavion Sanders could sneak into the back of the first round too. I think that's possible. He is a weapon for Texas. Texas, we didn't talk about Xavier Worthy. He would have just missed my top 5. He's a little small for me to be in the top 5, but a very explosive receiver. Quinn Ewers at quarterback is some people I'm sure have him in the top 5. I think I have him at 7 in my list, but so they have a very explosive offense as well. But Sanders is just the one who consistently picks up chunks of yards for this team. Like when Quinn Ewers needs to pick up yards, he struggles with the deep ball to Xavier Worthy, and instead he just settles down and finds Jatavion Sanders, who consistently gets open over the middle of the field. And when he gets the ball in his hands, he's very physical and can go up and make plays through traffic. It's just a matter of, unlike Brock Bowers, who I said they'll give him handoffs because once he gets the ball in his hand, he's that explosive. Jatavion Sanders is going to catch the ball, try to get upfield and get what he can out of it, but I don't think you're going to see Jatavion Sanders ripping off 40-yard gains consistently or 25-yard gains consistently, maybe at the NFL level, which Brock Bowers, being the athlete he is, we might actually see something like that out of him. Yeah,
it definitely is possible. Moving on to number 3 here. And, tight end, I would say, is usually the position I probably get to like really diving into the last. So I'm not even going to pretend like I know a lot about these next 3 guys here. Number 3, we got Oronde Gadsden, if I'm saying that right. Believe he had a pretty huge year last year, but he's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start this year. Is that correct?
So he's actually hurt. He's out for the rest of the remainder of the season. I believe it's his ankle. Here's the deal with Oronde Gadsden. Specifically Fantrax, where I play my college fantasy football leagues, lists him as a tight end. If you watch Oronde Gadsden at Syracuse, he doesn't play tight end very often. He plays wide receiver, and he's very good at it. He is like 6'7", 215 pounds. So they list him at tight end, but he is just like you mentioned Johnny Wilson earlier with Florida State. These big, tall receivers. That's pretty much what Oronde Gadsden does. If he keeps that tight end eligibility, though, but he goes into the NFL for fantasy, he could be very good. It's just a matter of Mike Evans is this big, tall receiver, and I don't think Oronde Gadsden will be that good. But going back a ways, Vincent Jackson was a big, tall receiver who kind of beat people just being bigger than them. I think we could see that in Oronde Gadsden in the right system.
Okay. What about number 4? Here we got Bryson Nesbitt. He's one that's been a little bit more productive in the early going. Tell us about him.
Yeah. So my list is for fantasy here. I went with fantasy tight ends because I think the next guy that we'll talk about is probably going to get drafted higher. But Bryson Nesbitt, a pass catching option for, you mentioned you're a North Carolina guy. That's what Bryson Nesbitt does for them. He catches passes. I think he had over 14 yards to catch last year. And that's when they had the Phil Longo offense running there. So he can be a catch and run threat as a fluid athlete. He's not going to be an elite speed guy. I don't think that's it. He's more of a accelerate, but not really pull away from people. It's just, he's an average size prospect for a tight end. That's the question with him is, I said, he's a receiving option. He's not your typical tight end that the NFL might devalue a little bit because of the size that he's going to offer. I think they list him at about 6'5", but only 230, which is just not as what the NFL size threshold usually is. So if he lands in the right system, though, as a pass catching option, I think that he could find some fantasy value.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. There is a lot of tight ends that have kind of came out of nowhere. Not that Nesbitt's came out of nowhere by any means. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of times you see these tight ends kind of the 3, 4, 5 range that end up being the best one. I mean, I think Sam Laporta coming into this year was kind of the number 3 consensus guy, and we've seen him jump up to pretty clearly the number 1 guy in this class, I think. Is that a case that we could see with sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but I heard Cade Stover. Is it a similar situation there? So you mentioned you could see him getting drafted a little bit higher, and then go ahead and finish up your thought that I so rudely interrupted you on.
No, you're good. You're good. Just like I think tight end, part of the tight end is where do they get drafted, and that's all of these positions. But tight end, as much as anything, is all about system and which system is designed for the tight end to get out in space and utilize their ability. So if Sam Laporta had went somewhere like Tennessee, I wouldn't have liked it as much because they just don't use the downfield threat, and Detroit's been a great fit for him. And yeah, absolutely, he's taken off this season. Cade Stover is another Ohio State offensive weapon, which brings us to 4 we've talked about here.
Yep.
Cade Stover, I think, will probably get drafted ahead of Bryson Nesbitt and Oronde Gadsden because he is just a much more traditional tight end. He can catch the ball. He can break tackles. I think in this past game we just talked about against Notre Dame, I think he had 6 or 7 catches for 80 yards.
Yeah.
He can actually get down the field. Most of the time they just ask him to kind of operate underneath because Marvin Harrison is the one that they're going to send down the field, or Emeka Ibuka, but he can operate down the field. The only question I ever have with Cade Stover is he's had problems with some drops in his career. When people get up in his face, he'll drop a few balls, kind of gets his face turned or his head turned a little too quick. Doesn't always look the ball in, but that's coachable. That can absolutely be coached. I think Cade Stover is probably a day 2 pick by an NFL team who will take a chance on him, fixing the blocks or the drops, and take advantage of the full skill set that Cade Stover offers.
And I didn't ask, but Godson down pretty much. We're thinking more round 2, round 3, not round 1 at that point, probably.
Yeah, probably. Yep. Day 2 picks, I would think.
Okay, perfect. Well, the last thing I want to do here, one of the best things you can do in Dynasty Leagues is go trade for draft picks like a year ahead of time. For some reason, it doesn't make sense to me, but for so many people, they're saying, hey, even though it's first round pick, it's a year later, so it's going to be a little bit less value. So one of the best things you can do in a rebuild is start stacking up those future picks. So I just kind of want to put a few more names in people's minds here. I don't want to keep you here too long, but maybe let's go through and highlight maybe 3 or 4 of your top guys in that 2025 class. We'll run it across the bottom here. We got some quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, and tight ends just for everyone that's viewing this to kind of take note of. But tell us about a few of the big ones that you're really excited about coming out in 2025.
2025, I'd say the top quarterback that will become first eligible in 2025, assuming Shedeur Sanders leaves the NFL this year, would be Drew Allar with Penn State. Drew Allar was not the starter. They had Sean Clifford up until the very end of last season, since drafted by the Packers. But Drew Allar has come out this season and looked the part. A little struggled this past week a little bit against a pretty good a very good Iowa defense. But
yeah,
Drew Allar, he can move with his feet. I think he's 6'5", 240. So another one kind of like Drake Maye, where he's big, physical, has the arm to do it. Malachi Nelson is actually not eligible till the following year. Malachi Nelson is backing up Caleb Williams at USC. He was the number one recruit, depending on which site you use. There was 3 big recruits this past year, but Malachi Nelson, if you've watched any of the high school film, because that's all we have on him, there are some big time throws on that film already. So we have to see what happens when he actually steps into the Lincoln Riley offense at USC, which you'd expect to be next year. But that is a player that I'm very excited to see in 2026. As for another 2025, he's not even on the list that I sent you. I'd also throw in Cade Klubnik, quarterback at Clemson. So after Trevor Lawrence left, the expected starter was DJ Uiagalelei, who has since transferred to Oregon State because Cade Klubnik kind of replaced him last year at Oregon. And it's been a little bit of a slow start, but the Clemson offense has dealt with some big injuries already this year. Their receivers are a little down. So I think Cade Klubnik is going to be a pretty high-end NFL player himself at quarterback. Running backs, the big running backs are actually coming. There's 2 big running backs coming the following season. Nick Singleton is also at Penn State. Nick Singleton is he'll probably be the next really, really highly sought after running back. I don't want to say he's as highly. Bijan, we just saw go, I think, 7 overall, 9 overall, something like that.
I was going to ask how you compare those two. Yeah.
I don't know if he might not go that high because I don't know if he'll show the receiving ability. Bijan's another one where he could split out wide. His hands are that strong where he could go out wide and catch passes for Texas. I'm not sure that we've seen that with Nick Singleton, and I'm not sure we will see that with Nick Singleton. Penn State splits carries with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. So I think that the NFL teams will value him as a first-round pick. I don't know if it will be a top half of the first-round pick. The other running back to keep in mind, though, is Quinshon Judkins down at Ole Miss. A phenomenal season last year. I believe he was a true freshman last year, and so he's probably not eligible for the draft till 2025. And I know it's been a slow start to this season, but you watch some of the things that he's doing against SEC defenses last year. Very good SEC defenses where he's consistently picking up 200 yards for Ole Miss. And you can see the talent is there. So I think it'll be the question next year is who's ends up being drafted first between Nick Singleton and Quinshon Judkins.
Yeah, man, the running back class in 2025 is so crazy. Like this year, it seems like a big runner or a big wide receiver class, but like next year is the running back class. It's going to be somewhat similar to this one.
There'll be some receivers though next year too. So we should talk about Luther Burden. Luther Burden was I think he was the top prospect overall last year and kind of shocked the world when he chose Missouri, which is where he's from. And last year, it wasn't I don't have the stats in front of me, but I feel like it was probably roughly 40 catches for about 500 yards, but he turned those into 7 touchdowns. And they just routinely would get him the ball in space. They would throw him a screen and he would consistently take it 50 yards. I know there was an incredible punt return. And then this year, all offseason, we heard the rumors of Alabama was going to give him big chunks of money to come play for him and LSU, and they all went to see him. And Luther Burden said, no, I'm coming back to Missouri again. Kind of surprised a lot of people again, but it's like in the offseason, the coaches figured out, okay, we've got to get Luther Burden the ball more. And this year he's already got 504 yards and 3 touchdowns on just 32 catches. He is extremely explosive when he gets the ball. 5'11", 208, but he looks like a running back who can pick up huge chunks of yards in space. And the other name that I want to throw out as a future receiver to remember is only a true freshman, so will not be eligible for 2 years. But if you saw the first game of the season for USC, Zachariah Branch is a true freshman, and the comparisons are going to be made to Tyreek Hill because he has some absurd speed. I believe he had a kick return in that game and a punt return in that game. You can't teach people who can run the type of speed that Zachariah Branch can. So that's going to be a few years away, but get the ball to that man in space and watch him go because he's going to pick up big chunks of yards.
Awesome, man. Corey, I appreciate your time so much, man. I feel like I got a lot smarter just sitting here listening to you talk here. So hopefully everybody at home was able to do the same thing. Like I said, I know a lot of Dynasty people, they're scouting for college players get started, kind of February time. So the earlier you can get going on that, just the bigger advantage you're going to have. So Corey, what other stuff do you have coming out soon? Where can people find you on Twitter? What do you have going on here soon?
Yeah. So I joined Fantasy Six Pack a few months ago, and I do a weekly college fantasy football article. So it's not quite Devy. That's just players while they're in college. Every week I do a streamers article now. Actually, in the off season, I'm going to do some baseball stuff too for Fantasy Six Pack.
Nice.
But yeah, you can hit me up on Twitter. It's at Copieps, so COPIEPS. I love to talk college football. I talk pro football. I'll talk baseball with you. Whatever you want to talk about, you just hit me up. And yeah, join Fantasy Six Pack.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, one more time here, address at the bottom, fantasy6pack.net/plans. Well worth your money, like between all the projections you get, all the betting money you can make off of it. I mean, we have two of the best every Sunday on our morning show for DFS. And then again, you get in that Discord, if you have a weird league where it's 2 points for PPR and a half point for first down, unless they catch it left-handed, like you can get an exact thing that's set up for you here. It's a little bit better, a little more customized. So yeah, come on over there and join us in the Discord. It's a lot of fun. And again, man, Corey, I really appreciate you coming on, and we'll see everybody next week.
Anytime.